Welcome to RSA Conference 2024. We are in beautiful sunny San Francisco in Broadcast Alley, which is Moscone West. I am Jeff Mann, co-host of Paul's Security Weekly, and I'm here today to talk to Jay Mar-Tang. He's the field CISO for a company called Pentera. Jay, welcome to RSA.
Jeff, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having us here.
Yeah,
Amazing.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been in the industry for 15 years now.
Okay.
Spent most of it doing a lot of the defensive work, which is typically when you think of cybersecurity, right? You're putting up layer defenses, and that can consist of multiple different techs, which I have had the privilege of working with. So whether it's multi-factor authentication, data loss prevention, SIM, network detection response. And then I spent a little bit of time in the privileged identity space, and then finally had the opportunity to try a different type of security and really put on the hat of the attacker and the lens of the attacker. And I joined Pentera about 3.5 years ago. I've been doing that ever since.
So tell us a little bit about Pentera.
Sure. So Pentera is the global leader in automated security validation. And what we enable our customers to do is to look at their networks through that lens of the attacker and really test themselves on demand, moving away from what was once done manually. And being able to do it continuously, because
I'm a manual pen tester by trade, so be careful what you say.
Hey, it's all good, because you know what? We're not here to replace you. We're here to make your life a little bit easier.
Very good.
And that is all done through the use of automation. So think about, when you're doing things, now having a power tool in your tool belt that you can actually let go and work simultaneously. So we're trying to make you, folks of your nature, more effective, essentially, at your job.
Excellent. Yeah, and tool's an important word there. I'm old school. I started pen testing over 30 years ago.
Sure.
And all we had was manual back then. But automation certainly comes in handy. You mentioned that you try to protect networks, and of course networks these days, who knows where they are? But very often they're in the cloud.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing to help organizations that are moving more and more to cloud-based networks and environments?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen an explosion over the last several years. So many organizations now fall into the hybrid type of environment where they have still things traditionally on-prem, but at the same time they're moving and they have cloud workloads and data, and the attackers are hip to that. I mean, now we're seeing a lot of attacks that are still either originate in the cloud or involve cloud data. So what we want to do is that same mindset of thinking like the attacker and looking at your attack surface like the attacker. Now we got to take that attack surface and bring it into the fold. So what we allow to do when we launched Pentera Cloud, the goal was to really take the automation engine and become the first automated pen testing platform in the cloud to do all the types of attacks that attackers are doing, whether it's launching code, moving laterally, but now focus on cloud workloads, cloud data, cloud identities, but still encompass the whole IT environment as well. So, I mean, think about being able to move from your on-prem environment into your cloud, back to your on-prem. That is what we're looking to enable our customers to do now with our cloud product.
So from an attacker perspective, are you targeting the cloud, from anywhere on the internet? Are you targeting on-prem from the cloud and vice versa? Do you do all of the above?
Yes, all of the above. Because we think that there's too many attack vectors. Like there's such a big web of where the attackers can go, where they can originate from. So for us, it's a matter of we look at the attack surface, both internal attack surface, external attack surface, and cloud. So we want to wrap it all together and be able to do that.
Great. And you're a tool. You're supposed to supplement internal pen test teams or even third-party teams.
Yeah, I mean, we traditionally, if you didn't have the privilege or the luxury of having a team to do it in-house, you were doing it from the outside.
Right.
And that was just simply not enough, because we get a false, like a snapshot in time, almost a false sense of security, because we might get a once-a-year pen test or twice-a-year pen test. But think about how often the environment is changing. Right? We're adding in those identities, we're adding in infrastructure, and that could fundamentally change your risk footprint. So we want to be able to do it continuously. And again, for folks like yourselves who might be doing it manually, it's like, great, let's help you scale. right? Time is of the essence. We really want to minimize the dwell time that attackers have inside the environment, which is the time at which an intrusion begins up until which it's discovered. And by running these attacks continuously, we can hopefully get into the purple teaming mindset where we're continuously testing, we're continuously assessing, and we have a pulse on our network and say, we're good, we're good, we're ransomware ready, we're ready for this attack. Or, hey, maybe we're not, but at least we've identified the gaps, we can address those gaps, and then we can retest on demand.
Are there certain types of attacks or attack methodologies that sort of lend themselves more to cloud-based assets versus on-prem assets?
I think we see a lot of, hey, is information publicly exposed? It's a layup, right? It's like low-hanging fruit that attackers can go after.
Right.
So we naturally, incorporated that into our platform. But we definitely see heavily identity-based types of attacks. So not only just compromising the identities that live in the cloud, but again, the identities are any artifacts that can be picked up from the on-prem environment. So if you think about this, right, if you have cloud admins, they have certain API keys or certain access that could potentially be extracted from their machines. Well, why not see if your controls on those machines, like your EDR, whichever, can stop an attacker? So we're going to take a look at that and say, well, let's launch an attack. Let's see if those controls not only stop an alert Pentera. If they do, great. That means, okay, we're good. But if for some reason they don't, can the attacker progress the attack now from that asset and then pivot into the cloud?
Gotcha.
And that's just an example of a joint attack surface vector that we would want to hopefully exploit, or hopefully not exploit, right? Hopefully these controls that everyone is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars on, is stopping us.
What a concept.
Right?
Cybersecurity is at work.
But like up until now, how could you measure security? Right? You don't want to wait for an actual attack to happen. And that's what we're enabling, and that's what we want. We don't want to wait, we don't want to assume, we want to validate.
Of course, you're assuming that organizations notice the attack when it does happen and not find out about it months or years later, which has been the case many, many times.
Of course.
I mean, our listeners know that I do PCI as my day job, which is pretty much why we have the annual pen test and why we have a pen testing industry, arguably. And penetration testing has evolved even in PCI, and there's more penetration testing, more focused penetration testing, especially at the application layer. You cover all the bases. Does your tool lend itself more to network attacks, or web-based or API-based attacks?
Network and web for sure.
Okay.
And infrastructure for sure. You brought up something though that I wanted to address because you said compliance had driven pen tests for such a long time.
Well, you asked how do we measure security, and the answer traditionally is compliance.
Correct. Right. And we've seen that, right?
Yep.
But Pentera actually issued a state of penetration testing report. We do it every year, just to see where everyone falls, where everyone stacks up, right? And one of those data points that we actually pulled out was that the big driver for penetration testing now is not so much compliance, but the board of directors and upper management executives, they want to know if the organization's ready. And that's actually, in my opinion, I think that's good. I think that's a good sign because we're not just checking a box. We actually are trying to be proactive with our approach to security, and that's always great because the attackers are proactive. They're working with each other. I think it's good that we're trying to step up our game as security practitioners.
Well, for those organizations that have the maturity, there's nothing like the live fire test. How well do we hold up against actual attacks? And there is no substitute for that.
There is none, and it can be very telling when all of a sudden you have EDR you thought was 100% rolled out, and it's not, or you have what you think is a SOC that's responding at a certain SLA, and maybe they are, but they're not including all the details. And those details of the evidence-based step-by-step attack is what we're trying to provide. We provide this to our customers so they can cross-reference and say, okay, well, did we get the whole story, right? And it's okay if you don't. because nothing is perfect. But as long as you're taking steps in the right direction, I think that's what it's all about.
Do you do your customers, clients tend to be more the end user, as it were, or how much are you working with third-party providers that are hosting a bunch of organizations? And there's always that, especially in PCI, there's that gray area of who's responsible for the pen testing.
Yeah, no, we're seeing a lot. All of our customers have a vested interest in taking this on themselves now.
Good.
And like I mentioned, we've been here. I've been at Pentera for about 3.5 years.
Okay.
I've just seen it grow more and more and more. It's reflective of what we're seeing in the survey, for example, that I mentioned, that customers in the boards, they want to know themselves. And I think they want to do it more often than what they were. And they want to potentially get a bigger bang for their buck, right?
Sure.
In regard to, if I'm spending, X amount for just one time a year, I can spend X amount and do it once a month with Pentera.
Right. Yeah, and there's certainly something to be said for that increased sort of continuous awareness of what could be going wrong and what might be happening.
Yeah.
And there's also nothing like, especially when you're outsourcing MSSP providers, response, it's good to know that they're on the ball.
Yeah.
I wish there was more of that, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think with global organizations too, they need to establish a baseline. And if you have testing that's happening in the Americas and testing that's happening in Europe and testing that's happening in Asia, how do you know what is that baseline? I mean, it's not, right? Unless you have a team that's flying around. And to be fair, we've had customers who actually, we call it the James Bond model, right? Who's taken Pentera and they will get on a plane and they use Pentera as the baseline to actually establish that baseline and run the tests, so they can say, okay, now we have an apples to apples comparison across the board.
How does Pentera Cloud get deployed, or is it something you log into, or is it something you deploy into your environment?
Pentera is something that you deploy in your environment.
Okay.
So it is software that sits on top of hardware, or it could be, in your cloud, could be deployed as a VM or an EC2 instance.
Okay.
And it's completely agentless, and that's a big game changer because that really helps with time to value, where you don't have to deploy or manage agents. You are now taking Pentera, installing it, pointing it at the different ranges you want to go, and you are off to the races. And we offer, if anyone out there who is like, no way, bring us in, right? We do a proof of concept, proof of value in a day. Just due to the automation, it's a very light lift, and it's a fun day. You're in the game. It's a fun way. It's a fun part of security.
I'm retired. I hung up my pen testing hat a few years ago, moved on to other things, but I'm definitely still immersed in it.
Yeah.
Our time is winding down.
Okay.
Any other final thoughts or messages you want to convey to our audience?
I think there's nothing more that I could say than think and behave like the attacker, because you're only going to get a true understanding of risk when you launch real-life exploits. And we want to do that continuously. We don't want to assume. We want to validate. And if any of this has intrigued you, we're more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time,
Jeff, thank you so
today,
much.
Jay. I hope you have a great show this
Likewise.
week. The weather couldn't be better, and it's supposed to get better every day.
I hope so.
If anybody wants to find out more about Pentera, you can visit our website, securityweekly.com/Pentera RSAC. Jay, thank you very much.
Jeff, thank you.
Have a great show.